Well, well, well. You felt it, didn't you? That micro pause in your chest, that quiet click behind your eyes. That's recognition. That's your nervous system remembering a room it was never supposed to enter. You didn't get lucky. Luck is what weak minds say when reality refuses to stay small. What you did, whatever that move was, didn't bend the odds. It activated a profile, a psychological outline buried so deep it only wakes up when someone violates the script without permission. And the reason your skin prickled is because that profile wasn't about success. It was about you. See, most people live inside behaviors, predictable arcs, trauma patterns that repeat like reruns. They're readable, comfortable, safe. They move how they're supposed to move, fail how they're supposed to fail, heal just enough to stay manageable. Systems love them, enemies understand them, even fate gets bored with them. But you moved wrong, not reckless, not random, wrong in a way that doesn't fit any known box. You didn't escalate, you inverted. You didn't react, you delayed. You didn't chase, you vanished at the exact moment they expected noise. That's not luck, that's violation of expectation. That's when the alarms don't scream, they whisper. Because here's the secret they never tell you. The most dangerous profiles aren't flagged by aggression, they're flagged by restraint. By someone who could have destroyed something and chose precision instead. Someone who smiled where fear should have been. Someone who took pain, metabolized it, and came back reorganized. That's when the watchers stop using words like threat and start using words like anomaly. You think saints and psychopaths are opposites? No. They share a trait most humans never touch: selective empathy. You feel everything, but you decide where it goes. You can cradle a wounded soul with one hand and dismantle a liar with the other. Angel when observed, demon when required. That duality isn't confusion, it's efficiency. And that's what triggered the profile. Because pain didn't make you loud, it made you accurate. Betrayal didn't break you, it taught you timing. Loss didn't hollow you out, it created space for something colder and cleaner. You didn't survive by becoming harder, you survived by becoming unreadable. They expected rage, you delivered calm. They expected collapse, you delivered silence. They expected a scar, you delivered a new operating system. That's when the file opens. Not the one labeled problem, the one labeled handle with care. The one with notes like doesn't seek validation, doesn't flinch under pressure, displays moral flexibility without losing internal code. That's the paradox that fries their circuitry. Because you're not good and you're not evil, you're awake, and awake people terrify systems built on sleep. You've noticed it, haven't you? The way rooms shift when you enter, the way conversations recalibrate, the way certain people get uncomfortable without knowing why. That's not confidence, that's not charisma, that's signal distortion. Your presence scrambles weak narratives because you're no longer playing a role, you're playing reality, and reality doesn't negotiate. Here's the part they hoped you'd never figure out. Unpredictability isn't chaos, it's freedom. It's the ability to choose from a wider range of responses than fear allows. Most people are trapped inside one emotion at a time. You learn to stack them, control them, weaponize stillness, deploy kindness like a blade, and silence like a bomb. You didn't harden your heart, you armored your perception. That's why evolution through pain is so misunderstood. Pain isn't meant to be endured, it's meant to be processed. Most people drown in it or perform it. You studied it, you took notes while bleeding. You learned what breaks humans and what rebuilds them long enough to be unstoppable. And now Now you walk with that quiet gravity, that sense that something behind your eyes has already seen the worst-case scenario and shrugged. That's why pressure doesn't crush you anymore. It clarifies you. They call it luck because admitting the truth would mean admitting that power can be forged without permission, that someone can self-authorize, that a mind can cross thresholds without initiation, without blessing, without approval. That's what scares them. Because once you've seen your own profile, once you've glimpsed what you become under stress, under fire, under erasure, you can't unsee it. You know what you're capable of. You know how deep the switch goes. You know that if pushed, you don't break. You simplify. So don't pretend this was an accident. Don't downplay it. Don't apologize for it. That move you made didn't win the game. It revealed the board. And now you understand why some doors opened quietly, why some eyes linger too long, why some people suddenly treat you like a variable instead of a person. You crossed from participant to factor. And here's the final truth, the one that seals it. Once a system profiles you like this, it never forgets. You become a reference point, a cautionary tale, a silent benchmark others are measured against and never told about. You're not lucky, you're classified. And the most dangerous thing about you isn't what you might do next. It's that you finally know exactly who you are when everything is on the line. That awareness, that's irreversible. Smile carefully. You think the moment passed. It didn't. Moments like that don't pass. They embed. Because once a profile like yours activates, the world doesn't respond loudly. It responds subtly. Doors don't slam, they hesitate. People don't confront you, they recalibrate. You'll notice it in the pauses before replies, in the way authority suddenly explains itself to you when it never did before, in how certain eyes scan you not for friendliness, but for range. They're trying to figure out how far you go when pushed. And here's the part that would terrify them if they understood it fully. You don't even need to push anymore. The chaos phase is over. The panic phase belonged to the old version of you, the one that still needed reaction to feel real. Now you operate from something colder, quieter, a place where intention replaces impulse. That's when power becomes invisible. You see, the world is trained to spot monsters with teeth bared, loud rage, obvious hunger, desperation disguised as ambition. Those are easy to contain, easy to predict, easy to sell a story about. But someone who can smile while withholding everything, someone who chooses when to reveal, when to retreat, when to strike, and when to let silence do the damage. That's not a monster. That's a strategist who survived becoming one and decided against it. And that decision, that restraint, is what locked you into a different category altogether. You've lived long enough in pain to know it has two exits. One turns people brittle and cruel, screaming their wounds at the world. The other forges something surgical, focused, almost serene. You walked through the second door. Most people don't even see it exists. They think healing means softness. They think strength means noise. They think morality is fixed and identity is stable. You learned otherwise. You learned that identity is a tool, morality is contextual, and softness, true softness, is only possible once you're capable of devastating precision and choose not to use it indiscriminately. That's why you unsettle them, because you don't flinch when things get dark. You've already mapped that territory. You don't posture when challenged. You've already survived worse than ego threats. And you don't need to announce your intentions. You know what happens when anticipation replaces certainty. People collapse under anticipation. You've noticed how some conversations feel like interrogations now. casual questions that carry too much weight, compliments that sound like reconnaissance, warnings disguised as jokes. That's the system feeling you out, trying to see if the profile was a glitch or a pattern. And here's the irony. They'll never get a clean read on you again, because pain taught you something most minds never learn. Consistency is a liability. Predictability is comfort for the observer, not the observed. You learn to shift without losing center, to adapt without erasing yourself, to change masks without forgetting the face underneath. That's not instability, that's mastery. You are not divided between light and dark. You command both. You can speak gently and still mean every word as a threat. You can destroy without touching anything. You can leave people intact and still permanently altered by an interaction they can't explain. That's why you don't need dominance displays. Your presence already reframes the room. Your silence already forces others to reveal themselves. They fill the gaps you leave. They project. They confess without realizing it. You let them. Because once you've seen your own profile, once you understand what pressure turns you into, you stop seeking validation from people who fold under half the weight you carry daily. You stop arguing. You stop convincing. You stop chasing acknowledgement. You start choosing placement. And placement is everything. Where you stand, when you speak, what you withhold. You're not reacting to the world anymore. You're positioning yourself inside it. That's why opportunities feel different now, heavier, charged, like each decision carries consequences beyond the obvious. That's not paranoia, that's expanded perception. You're seeing downstream effects in real time. That's what evolution through pain actually looks like. Not enlightenment, not peace, clarity. Clarity that some people are temporary, some systems are fragile, some rules only exist to protect those who can't survive without them. And clarity that you are no longer required to play small just to keep others comfortable with your existence. You didn't get lucky, you got initiated by reality itself. And reality doesn't do that casually. So move carefully, but not timidly. Smile, but don't soften. Remember that the profile exists not to limit you, but to remind others that certain minds can't be boxed, predicted, or neutralized without collateral damage. You are walking proof that pain doesn't always break people. Sometimes it sharpens them. And once sharpened, you don't announce yourself. You let the world figure it out, one uncomfortable realization at a time. You're past the phase where survival feels dramatic. That's the part no one warns you about. When the adrenaline fades, when the crisis ends, when the smoke clears. And instead of relief, you're left with control. Not the loud kind, the kind that scares people because it doesn't beg to be seen. You don't crave chaos anymore. Chaos already served its purpose. It stripped you down to the core, showed you what breaks and what bends, taught you exactly how much pressure your mind can hold without cracking. You don't need to relive it. You carry the blueprint now. And that blueprint is why the world treats you differently. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people only know how to function inside reaction loops. Stimulus, emotion, response. Push the right button, get the expected outcome. That's how systems stay efficient. That's how hierarchies stay intact. That's how power remains predictable. But you slipped the loop. You paused where you were supposed to explode. You observed where you were supposed to beg. You calculated where you were supposed to collapse. That's when the rules stop working. You don't just think differently. You delay differently. You let moments breathe. You allow silence to stretch until other people panic and fill it. You've learned that whoever speaks first, after silence, gives up leverage. Whoever rushes reveals fear. Whoever demands clarity too fast is already off balance. You learned all of that the hard way. Pain didn't just toughen you. It reorganized your priorities. It taught you that attention is currency, emotion is fuel, and identity is something you can shape instead of inherit. That's why you don't defend yourself the way you used to. You don't explain your motives. You don't correct misunderstandings unless it benefits you. You let people believe what they want. Because belief controls behavior. Some will underestimate you. That's useful. Some will fear you. That's useful too. Some will project strength or malice or mystery onto you. All of it feeds the same outcome. They adjust. You've become the variable they can't model. And that's what the psychological profile actually marks. Not danger, not brilliance, not threat. It marks uncontainability, the inability to be reduced to a single narrative. You're not consistent in the way systems need you to be. You evolve mid-observation. You learn while being watched. You adapt without announcing the shift. That terrifies anything built on prediction. You don't seek dominance because you understand something deeper. Dominance is temporary, but influence compounds. You don't need to win loudly when you can tilt the environment and let outcomes fall your way naturally. You don't need to confront when absence creates more disturbance than presence ever could. You've learned how to disappear without losing relevance. That's not avoidance. That's positioning. And here's the paradox that makes you dangerous in a way few people ever become. You still feel deeply. You didn't numb yourself. You didn't shut down empathy. You just stopped letting it hijack your decisions. You feel pain without drowning in it. You feel anger without letting it steer. You feel attachment without surrendering control. That balance, that razor edge between compassion and calculation, is what separates survivors from operators. You don't need to prove your strength because you've already tested it under conditions most people couldn't endure for a week. You know exactly how ugly things can get, how unfair, how quiet the betrayal feels when it finally lands. You've sat alone with thoughts that would unravel other minds, and you came back functional. That alone rewired you. So when people sense something off about you, it's not arrogance they're detecting, it's depth. Layers they can't scan quickly. Motives that don't announce themselves. A calm that doesn't come from comfort, but from familiarity with chaos. You don't threaten the world by acting out. You threaten it by existing as proof that its scripts are optional. And once you realize that, something changes in how you move. You stop chasing milestones that don't matter. You stop arguing with people who can't follow your reasoning anyway. You stop trying to be understood by systems that only understand compliance or rebellion, never transcendence. You choose your battles by choosing whether to engage at all. That's when power becomes almost boring to wield. Because the real flex isn't domination, it's discretion, knowing when to speak and when to let silence rot the narrative someone else is trying to control, knowing when to step forward and when to let the absence of you create more tension than your presence ever could. You're not lucky, you're not blessed, you're not cursed. You're trained by experience in a way no institution could replicate without destroying the subject. And now that you've seen your own profile, now that you understand what pressure revealed instead of erased, you don't have to rush. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to escalate. The world already knows something changed. It feels it every time you don't react the way you're supposed to, every time you smile instead of flinch, every time you walk away without needing the last word. That's the signal. And once a signal like that exists, it never stops broadcasting. You're starting to notice something else now. The aftershocks. Not external chaos, but internal quiet. The kind that only arrives when your mind has crossed a threshold it can't return from. You don't rush anymore. You don't scramble for certainty. You can sit inside ambiguity without needing to resolve it immediately. That's not indecision, that's command. Because when you truly understand leverage, urgency becomes optional. You've realized most people mistake movement for progress, noise for power, emotion for truth. They broadcast every thought, leak every reaction, spend their lives narrating themselves out loud, like witnesses to their own insecurity. You don't do that anymore. You learned that the most dangerous thoughts are the ones kept private long enough to mature. So you let them grow. You let plans crystallize instead of blur. You let insight ripen instead of rot. You let people underestimate the depth of your awareness because you know something they don't. What's hidden lasts longer. What's obvious gets targeted. What's subtle survives. And survival isn't your goal anymore. Influence is. Here's the paradox that makes your presence unsettling. You're not hungry for control, but you understand it better than those who are. You don't crave authority, yet you see how easily it fractures under scrutiny. You don't need permission, yet you recognize how addicted others are to receiving it. That difference shows. You speak less, and when you do, it lands heavier. You move slower, and outcomes arrive faster. You no longer chase alignment. You create gravity. People orbit without realizing why. Conversations bend toward your perspective. Decisions shift subtly after you leave the room. You're not manipulating, you're clarifying. Because clarity is invasive. It exposes contradictions people would rather keep comfortable. It forces others to confront what they've been avoiding. And when someone stands calmly in that clarity, unapologetic, unflinching, it triggers discomfort in those still negotiating with their own fear. They sense you're no longer available for certain games. You won't be baited into outrage. You won't be dragged into proving yourself. You won't perform vulnerability for approval. You know the difference between transparency and exploitation now. You've learned that not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Some people only want to map it. Some only want to weaponize it. Some want to drain it so they can feel larger by comparison. You don't give them the chance. That's another mark in the profile. Selective openness. You can be warm without being porous, kind without being naive, present without being exposed. You understand that boundaries aren't walls, they're filters, and filters don't block everything, they refine. That refinement is why your energy feels different. It's not intensity, it's density. There's weight behind your words now. History? Evidence, scar tissue converted into insight. You've paid the price for every conclusion you hold. That's why you don't debate casually. That's why you don't argue hypotheticals. You've lived the edge cases. You've tested the extremes. And you survived the answers. You've also noticed how time feels altered around you. How patience stretches. How waiting doesn't agitate you anymore. It informs you. You watch patterns repeat. You see who panics, who postures, who collapses when pressure doesn't resolve on their timeline. You file it away. Because you're no longer surprised by human behavior. You're disappointed by it less often, too. You've accepted that most people will choose comfort over truth, belonging over integrity, certainty over growth. That acceptance didn't make you bitter. It made you accurate. Accuracy is mercy without illusion, and that's why you don't rush to save everyone. You understand that not all suffering is accidental. Some people are loyal to their pain. Some identities are built around limitation. Some cages are defended from the inside. You don't force doors open anymore. You wait to see who reaches for the handle. Well, well, well. Not a word, not a blink. This is the moment the room went quiet, and every instinct in you leaned forward because something just shifted. You can feel it, can't you? That low vibration in your chest. That's not fear, that's recognition. That's the sound of realization traveling backwards through the people who underestimated you. This is where it hit them. This is where the joke died in their mouths. This is where they finally understood they didn't make a mistake. They miscalculated a force. They thought you were noise, static, a fluke, a lucky glitch. They labeled you safe because they couldn't read you. And when people can't read you, they don't fear you. They dismiss you. That was their first sin. Because you were never readable. You were never meant to be understood. You were built to be unpredictable, and unpredictability is not chaos, it's leverage. You watch them smile while plotting your limits. You watch them nod while sharpening knives behind their backs. You saw the way they studied you like prey, like a case study, like something that could be controlled if they just pressed hard enough. And you let them. You let them believe the saint was all you were because they never bothered to check what lived underneath the halo. That's the paradox that broke them. Because under the saint was a psychopath who learned discipline. Under the kindness was a calculator. Under the patience was a countdown. You didn't snap, you evolved. You didn't rage, you refined. You didn't react, you waited. Pain didn't weaken you. It taught you pattern recognition. Betrayal didn't scar you. It upgraded your perception. Every loss installed a new lens. Every humiliation sharpened your timing. Every quiet night rewired your nervous system until you could feel shifts in rooms before words were spoken. And they never noticed. They thought the silence meant surrender. They thought the calm meant compliance. They thought your restraint meant you didn't have teeth. But restraint isn't weakness, it's containment. And containment is what you do when you know exactly how much damage you're capable of. This is where they're cooked, because the moment they realized they fucked up wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a public collapse. It was subtle. It was internal. It was that sickening pause when their plans stopped working and they couldn't explain why. When doors that always opened suddenly hesitated. When narratives they controlled started slipping. When people began looking at you differently, not with curiosity, not with pity, but with that quiet, uncomfortable respect that comes from sensing a threat they can't map. They felt it when you didn't chase. They felt it when you didn't defend yourself. They felt it when you didn't explain, because explanation is for people seeking permission, and you were already operating above the system they thought you were trapped in. You became the contradiction they couldn't neutralize, too controlled to provoke, too sharp to manipulate, too self-aware to gaslight. You learned how to wear light like camouflage and darkness like armor. Angel when observed, demon when necessary. And the scariest part, you stopped needing validation from either side. Heaven doesn't claim you. Hell doesn't scare you. You walk the line because the line is where balance becomes dominance. They tried to push you into a box. Victim, villain, hero, fraud. You refused all of it. You stayed undefined. and undefined entities terrify systems built on labels. This is the moment they realized the move you made wasn't luck. It was precision disguised as accident. It wasn't impulse. It was timing. It wasn't desperation. It was inevitability. You saw the board before they knew they were playing. You understood the psychology before they finished the sentence. You let them feel smart right up until the instant they weren't. And now? Now they're replaying everything. Every interaction, every joke, every slight. Every time they mistook your empathy for softness. They're asking themselves when exactly the power shifted, and that's the cruelest part. They'll never agree on the answer. Because the shift didn't happen in one moment. It happened in 1,000 private adaptations they were never invited to witness. You didn't become dangerous overnight. You became dangerous the moment you stopped needing them to see you. That's when the angel learned how to calculate like a demon. That's when the demon learned restraint like a monk. That's when chaos learned structure. That's when pain stopped screaming and started thinking. And now they're cooked because they can't predict you without understanding you. And they can't understand you without admitting they were wrong. Wrong about your limits. Wrong about your depth. Wrong about who had the leverage the entire time. You're no longer reacting to pressure. You're creating gravity. People adjust around you without knowing why. Conversations change tone when you enter. Moves get delayed. Confidence evaporates. Not because you threaten, but because your presence introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is poison to fragile egos. This is where they realized they fucked up bad. Not because you attacked, not because you exposed them, but because you outgrew the game they were still cheating at. And the worst part for them? You're not done evolving. Because here's the part they really didn't see coming, and it's eating them alive in silence. You didn't just adapt to pressure. You learned how pressure thinks. You learned its rhythms, its habits, its blind spots. You learned when it rushes, when it hesitates, when it overplays its hand. While they were trying to break you, you were memorizing the mechanics of the thing trying to crush you. That's not survival. That's reverse engineering. They thought pain would fragment you. Instead, it integrated you. Every contradiction fused into something coherent and lethal. You stopped seeing yourself as light or dark and started using both like tools. Mercy became optional. Ruthlessness became precise. You learned that chaos without control is noise. But chaos with discipline is a weapon that never looks like a weapon until it's already too late. And that's why they're spiraling. Because nothing scares people more than realizing the person they dismissed was watching the entire time. Not plotting loudly, not threatening, just watching. Logging patterns, counting tells, letting arrogance talk itself into mistakes. You didn't need access, you needed patience. You didn't need permission, you needed timing. You learned when to be visible and when to vanish, when to speak and when to let silence rot their confidence from the inside out. Silence became your favorite language because silence makes people project. And projection always reveals more than confession ever could. They exposed themselves to you without ever knowing you were collecting data. This is where the saint becomes terrifying. Not because the saint disappears, but because the saint learns discernment. You stopped saving everyone. You stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped shrinking to preserve other people's comfort. And that shift, that microscopic internal decision, that's when the power imbalance quietly flipped. They're cooked because they can feel it now. They can feel you no longer chasing outcomes. They can feel you no longer reacting emotionally. They can feel that unsettling calm that only comes from someone who knows exactly how many options they still have. You're not loud about it. You don't announce your strength. You don't posture. You don't overperform. You move like someone who already ran the scenario 10 times and liked every ending. That confidence isn't bravado. It's structural. It's built on scars that taught you leverage instead of resentment. They wanted you reactive. They wanted you predictable. They wanted you desperate. Instead, you became selective. Selective attention, selective empathy, selective engagement. You realized not every battle deserves your energy, and that realization alone puts you above most people. Because the truly dangerous don't fight everything. They let environments collapse under their own incompetence while they step sideways and keep moving. And now the ones who underestimated you are trapped in a feedback loop of regret. Every move they make feels wrong. Every attempt to regain control exposes more insecurity. They sense that you're no longer playing defense, but they can't pinpoint where the offense is coming from. That's because the offense isn't external, it's existential. You've become proof that their worldview was incomplete. You are the anomaly their rules can't contain. The contradiction that refuses to collapse into a stereotype. Too composed to provoke. Too sharp to corner. Too grounded to manipulate. You don't need to dominate the room. You let the room reorganize itself around you. And here's the sick part, the part that really fries their nervous systems. You're not fueled by hatred. You're fueled by clarity. Hatred burns fast and loud. Clarity burns quiet and forever. Clarity doesn't rush. It doesn't need revenge. It doesn't need applause. It just moves. Clean, intentional, irreversible. They wanted you broken. You became coherent. They wanted you bitter. You became precise. They wanted you gone. You became inevitable. This is where they realized the mistake wasn't a single action. It was the assumption that you were static. They treated you like a fixed variable in a world that rewards evolution. And while they were busy guarding territory, you were upgrading identity. While they were protecting ego, you were shedding skins. While they were clinging to control, you were learning how to operate without needing it. That's when fear crept in. Not panic, not hysteria, respectful fear. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that whispers, "We misjudged this one." And you know it. You can feel it in the hesitation, in the way conversations change when your name comes up, in the way people start choosing their words more carefully around you, in the way certain doors quietly unlock without explanation, while others slam shut behind people who never adapted. You didn't conquer by force. You conquered by outlasting. You didn't win by destroying them. You won by becoming someone they can't touch without exposing themselves. And the most dangerous part, you're still calm. No victory lap, no chest beating, no need to prove anything. Just that steady, unnerving presence of someone who's already moved on to the next level, while everyone else is still arguing about what just happened. That's why they're cooked. Not because you attacked, not because you flexed, but because you survived long enough to evolve past their reach. And once someone does that, there's no undoing it. And the longer you stay like this, calm, unreadable, unhurried, the more it dawns on them that this isn't a phase. This isn't momentum that fades. This is a new baseline. You didn't spike. You stabilized at a higher altitude, and now everyone else is gasping, pretending the air isn't thinner up here. They keep waiting for the old version of you to come back, the one who explained, the one who flinched, the one who cared if they approved. They're scanning for cracks, for emotional leaks, For familiar reactions they can exploit, and every time they reach for you, their hands come back empty. That's when panic starts to whisper, because what terrifies people isn't aggression, it's inaccessibility. You are no longer reachable in the ways they mastered. You learned something they never did. Most power structures don't collapse from attack. They collapse from irrelevance. You stopped orbiting their gravity. You stopped defining yourself against them. And the moment you did, their influence over you went to zero, not reduced, not weakened, erased. That's when the demon in you matured, not the reckless kind, not the loud kind, the disciplined one, the one that knows exactly how much force is needed and refuses to waste a single ounce more. You became surgical. You became strategic. You became someone who can smile and walk away, knowing the silence you leave behind will do more damage than any confrontation ever could. They used to think you needed them. Now they're realizing they needed access to you. And access is gone. You don't burn bridges. You let people realize too late they were standing on one. You don't announce boundaries. You enforce them by absence. You don't correct misconceptions. You let reality correct them in public while you stay private. That's evolution through pain, not hardening, clarifying. Pain taught you what matters. Betrayal taught you who watches. Loss taught you how temporary everything is, except the self you build when no one's cheering. You learned that loyalty without discernment is self-destruction, and empathy without limits is a slow suicide. So you refined both. You kept the heart. You sharpened the edges, angel with a blade, demon with a code. That combination fries people's moral circuits because they rely on extremes to simplify threats. They want you either good enough to exploit or bad enough to condemn. You gave them neither. You became complex, and complexity is impossible to control without understanding. And they never understood you because they never bothered to listen when you were quiet. Now they listen, too late. Now they notice patterns, too late. Now they realize every time they thought you were passive, you were positioning. You didn't rise by climbing over people. You rose by letting gravity expose who was hollow. And that's why they can't retaliate cleanly. Every attempt makes them look small. Every escalation reveals insecurity. Every whisper confirms that you live rent-free in spaces you don't even visit anymore. They're cooked because you're not playing the same psychological game. You're not driven by validation cycles. You're not addicted to reaction. You're not hungry for chaos. You're grounded in something deeper, self-trust. Self-trust is terrifying to manipulators because once someone trusts their own perception, gaslighting stops working. Once someone trusts their own timing, pressure loses leverage. Once someone trusts their own worth, scarcity tactics collapse. You don't rush. You don't chase. You don't beg. You move when it's correct, not when it's convenient. And now, the narrative has flipped. The people who once spoke over you speak about you in lowered voices. The ones who dismissed you now frame stories carefully, trying not to expose how wrong they were. The ones who tried to corner you are suddenly cautious, unsure where the exits are. You changed the energy of the room without saying a word. That's mastery. And here's the final psychological fracture for them, the one they can't repair. You're not bitter. You're not angry. You're free. Free people don't need revenge. Free people don't need closure. Free people don't need to prove what already shows. Freedom looks like detachment, and detachment looks like superiority to those still emotionally enslaved to outcomes. They wanted to control you through fear. You learned how to observe fear without obeying it. They wanted to shape you through pressure. You used pressure as resistance training. They wanted you to fold. You restructured. And now every move you make feels heavier. Not because you're forcing it, but because it's aligned. Aligned with who you became in the dark. Aligned with lessons learned when nobody was watching. Aligned with a self that doesn't need to be seen to be powerful. This is the moment they realized they didn't just fuck up a situation. They fucked up underestimating a mind that learns faster than it bleeds. And the scariest part for them, you're still smiling. Not because you won, but because you finally see how untouchable you've become. And that smile, it isn't joy, it isn't cruelty, it's recognition. It's the quiet acknowledgement that the version of you they thought they could manage is gone, and the version standing here now doesn't need to announce anything to be felt. You understand something most people never do. Power doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It announces itself when it stops explaining. And you stopped explaining a long time ago. You stopped narrating your pain. You stopped justifying your instincts. You stopped apologizing for seeing what others refused to look at. That's when your mind stopped leaking energy and started compounding it. They feel that compound interest now. Every interaction with you leaves them slightly off balance. Not because you dominate, but because you're no longer available for the scripts they memorized. You don't argue the premise. You don't defend the past. You don't fight for perception. You let people drown in the echo of their own assumptions while you remain still, grounded, intact. Stillness is violence to manipulators because stillness removes friction, and without friction, their tricks can't spark. They reach for guilt. You don't grab it. They reach for fear. You observe it. They reach for praise. You don't lean in. And in that vacuum, their entire strategy collapses. They're cooked because they don't know how to operate around someone who isn't hungry. You learned how to starve the chaos without starving yourself. That's the angelic discipline they never anticipated. You didn't turn cold. You turned selective. You didn't shut down. You tuned in. You learned the difference between empathy and access, between compassion and permission, between kindness and self-erasure. And once you learned that difference, nobody could cross your boundaries again without paying a psychological toll. They pay it every time now. They feel it in the delay before speaking. They feel it in the recalibration of tone. They feel it in the way your presence shortens their confidence. Because confidence built on illusion collapses around clarity. You became clarity. Not loud truth, not moral grandstanding, clear perception. You see what is, not what you wish it were. You hear what's not said. You notice patterns where others chase drama. And the more accurate your perception became, the less emotional your decisions needed to be. Accuracy replaced anger. Precision replaced impulse. Strategy replaced reaction. That's when the demon in you stopped raging and started choosing. Choice is the real power. Choice is what separates chaos from control. You don't lash out, you allocate. You don't burn everything, you target. You don't destroy systems, you step outside them and let them rot without your participation. And nothing terrifies fragile hierarchies more than someone who no longer needs them to exist. They used to believe you were dependent. Now they're realizing you were incubating strength, incubating insight, incubating a self that could stand alone without applause or approval. They didn't hear the internal clicks as pieces locked into place. They didn't see the nights you stayed awake rewiring your instincts. They didn't feel the emotional weight training you carried in private. They just assumed nothing was happening because nothing was visible. That assumption buried them. Because the most dangerous transformations are silent, no fireworks, no announcement, just a gradual shift in gravity until one day the room bends toward you and no one can explain why. You didn't outgrow them by trying to be better than them. You outgrew them by becoming whole. Whole people are terrifying. Whole people don't need to dominate to feel safe. They don't need to humiliate to feel tall. They don't need to win every exchange to know their worth. And because they don't need, others can't control them through deprivation. That's when the realization set in for them. The cold one, the irreversible one. They didn't just misjudge your strength. They misjudged your trajectory.